Another important consideration over time is whether to make or purchase something. So we need to do a make or buy comparison for muffins. We have a number of assumptions we have provided ourselves here below. You're deciding whether or not to get into business of selling muffins. You're going to determine whether or not you should buy them or make them yourself. The spreadsheet will help you determine whether or not to do that. It takes 30 ounces of ingredients to make one muffin. However, when you buy them in bulk, you receive the discounts provided within the table below. Labor costs you $15 an hour, and it takes 1 minute to make one muffin. We have our 30 ounces defined in N22. We have our $15 defined in N30. You're going to purchase a number of items for this venture. 20 muffin trays, defined within M32, at $9 each, defined within N32. Next, we buy an oven for $11,000, which is defined in L34. We buy a mixer for $399 in M34, and cooling racks for $1,000, defined in N34. Next, we have a Home Depot credit card. We put these on. 12 monthly payments, defined in M35, at 23% per the interest rate. Next, we decide that we're going to make 13 payments instead of the 12, just to make sure that our payments are a little less. We've defined that in M36. We also have an assumption regarding buying the muffins. It costs us 50 cents for each muffin if we buy less than 10,000 muffins. We have defined our 50 cents within cell N39. If we purchase more than 10,000 muffins, that bulk cost drops down to 35 cents, which we've defined in N40. Next, we find out that the bakery charges us 7 cents for each muffin on up to $1,000. If it's more than $1,000, we have a flat tax of $1,000. Finally, the bakery charges us to store the muffins. You're charged 25 cents per muffin if we purchase less than 12,000 muffins, and 15 cents if we purchase over 12,000 muffins. So our 12,000 is defined within Q44, our 25 cents, which in Q43, and our 15 cents, which in this case is in R43. Again, we define our assumptions within cells so we can utilize them as absolute references to make it easier on ourselves. So how do we determine the cost of ingredients? We need to reference our 30 ounces and make that an absolute cell reference. What piece do we need next? Well, we need to multiply it by the number of muffins, which are defined above in row 2. So once we've multiplied that, then what do we need to do? We need to refer down to our table. First, we calculate how many ounces we have. In this case, 150,000. So we refer down to our table, and we notice that our cost per ounce is 3 cents. So we go back into our formula, and we multiply by our 3 cents. You will notice this ingredient cost is now $4,500. Let's autofill this through the row. However, you will notice that $0 appear for each of these, as we need to change these formulas a bit. we go through and change our formula for C3 to determine how many ounces we have. In this case, 450,000. So now we need to refer to our 1.5 cents, our 2 cents rather, as we are exactly 450,000. So that is cell D26. We now notice that that is 9,000. We then move over to D3. We now see we need 750 ounces. You'll see anything over 600,000 and one quantity in ounces cost us 1 cent. So we then refer and multiply that by our 1 cent. You will notice that if 25,000 muffins required us to utilize the bulk amount of bulk price, that the same will be said for our 50,000. So we do the same and we reference our D28 cell. So now we have calculated the cost of ingredients if we are going to make 5,000, 15,000, 25,000, or 50,000 muffins. Next, we need to determine our labor costs. How do we determine our labor cost? Well, we need to refer down to N30, our $15 an hour. If you so choose, you could also reference C13, which also features $15 an hour. For our purposes, I will utilize C13, that is closer to C. However, we need to make sure that it's an absolute reference, so when we autofill the formula across the row, we have no issues. However, we need to multiply this by something. We need to multiply this by our number of muffins, which in this specific case is in row 2. Well, we need to divide this by something because we can make 1 muffin per every minute. So we reference C12. Again, we need to make this an absolute so that when we drag it through the row, only the number of muffins will change for us. When we enter, we have a labor cost of $1,250. When we autofill the formula across, it now has provided us with the accurate information. How do we calculate our equipment costs? We need to utilize what is called a payment function, which is featured inside the financial section. What is our rate? As previously defined, that is our interest rate. In this case, 23%. So what do we need to do? Again, absolute value. How many payments are we going to make? Remember, we're going to make 13 to make our payments a little smaller. Again, an absolute value so that when we drag the formula and autofill it, there are no issues. How do we calculate our present value? We need to add together all of our costs. So let's do the easy cost first. L34 plus M34 plus N34. However, again, we want to refer to these as absolute values So when we drag the formula through, there are no issues. However, we're forgetting something. We need to add the cost of our trays. So we have 20 of them multiplied, $20 each for 9 of them. And again, make these absolute cell references so when we drag the formula across, there are no issues. Very long present value to calculate. Once we have OK, you'll notice our equipment cost a little over $3,000. When we autofill through, you'll notice that all of the equipment costs are exactly the same, no matter what we do. You'll notice in the total that we are adding B3, our ingredient costs, B4, our labor costs, and B6, our equipment costs. But you'll notice there's nothing in B6 currently. That is because we need to take the inverse of B5. So we do equals minus sign and select B5. As you probably learned very early in mathematics, a negative times a negative produces a positive. You autofill that through, and it is now the exact inverse of our equipment costs to give us our totals for how much it will cost us to make each specific muffin. So what if we want to buy the muffins? Well, we need to determine the purchase price. So we need to use our ifs function again. So what is going to be our first logical test? We need to determine if we have less than 10,000 muffins or not. We do. So what value will populate in this case? Our 5,000 muffins multiplied by what? Our assumption, way down in N39 of 50 cents. But what do we need to do? Absolute cell reference. So if that amount is ever changed, it does not affect the formula. But what happens if our H2 is greater than 10,000? We need to have that considered as a possibility as well. So in that case, we multiply our H2, our number of muffins, times our 35 cents. Again, we need to produce absolute cell reference so that if that is changed in the assumptions, it does not affect our formula. So when we click OK, you will notice that we get 2,500 because we have less than 10 muffins. We're using the 10,000 muffins. We are using the 35 cents per muffin. We autofill through, and we now have the purchase price required for each of our muffins. Now, how do we calculate our tax? We scroll down to our assumptions, and we read the bakery charges you 7 cents on each muffin up until $1,000. If your order produces more than $1,000 in tax, the bakery will charge you a flat tax of $1,000. So we need to multiply our number of muffins times 7 cents. You'll notice 3,500. You'll notice if the order produces more than 1,000 in tax, the bakery will charge you a flat tax of $1,000. So is 350 more than 1,000? No, it is not. So we autofill the formula through the row, and we notice that for every one of the other muffins, the amount is over 1,000. So we put in 1,000 for each of those taxes. We could have also used an if function in that specific case. However, because we are going to use an ifs function for storage, I did not want to use multiple ifs functions all at once. So for our storage, we need another ifs function. We need to determine if our number of muffins is less than one of our assumptions. In this case, Q44, our 12,000 muffins. Again, absolute cell reference to make it easy to drag the formula through. So if it's less, we need to multiply our number of muffins by Q43. Again, absolute cell reference, so when we drag it through, we're in good shape. We also need to test for whether or not we have more than 12,000 muffins. And in this case, if we do, we multiply by our cheaper amount. And we need to provide an absolute cell reference there as well. You'll notice in all of these cases, anytime you purchase items in bulk, they usually provide you with a discount. We click OK, and we now see that the storage cost is a little over $1,200. We autofill through, and we notice there are different amounts of storage fees for each amount of muffins. Finally, we need to determine whether or not we want to make or buy. Again, we need to utilize an ifs function. So what do we need to check for? Well, in this specific case, for 5,000 muffins, we want to check if the cost to make the muffins is greater than the cost to buy the muffins. If that is true, we give the result buy. If the cost to make muffins is less than the cost to buy muffins, we make. Does that make sense? If it costs more to make than to buy, we buy because it's cheaper to buy. If it is cheaper to make than it is to buy, we make instead. So we click OK, and you'll notice the word buy pops up. It is cheaper, 4,100 is cheaper than a little over 8,800. You autofill the formula down for each of the quantity of muffins, and you'll notice an error. Why is this an error? Because you will notice it is changing to B8 and H8. We need to fix this by changing to C7 and I7 for each piece. We now receive a buy result. For the next cell, we need to reference D7 and J7 for each part. Once we hit enter, we now get our result of buy. And finally, for the last cell, we need to reference E7 and K7. For each part. When you hit enter, you'll see buy again. Why are they all buy? You'll see that the cost to buy them for each number of muffins within these cells in this section are all lower than the cost to make the muffins. As a result, they are all buys.